All right, I'm just going to do this now. This is the supplement to a video I put out, a movie I put out a while ago called Dreamcast Forever, which was my goodbye letter, eulogy, love letter, whatever. It's my love letter to a dead person, the Sega Dreamcast. And it meant a lot to me to make, and I appreciate the 700 people on YouTube and like the 1,400 people on Facebook that watched it. I had extra interviews, and I had a couple final thoughts, and 99.99 is coming back at us. It's a couple days before that now, so I'll put this out on 99.99 to remind you to watch Dreamcast Forever. This is not it. This is Dreamcast Forever after the little... If that's the movie, this is like the behind-the-scenes supplement. And I'll put something over here to watch instead of just me in my car. I had a lot of enjoyment on it. It was wonderful going back, playing those games, seeing how I've changed, how the games have changed, and everything. And especially, I made a lot of that up to my wife having kids and us bringing the kids home, and also a little bit after the kids came home. But that was a lot of nice stuff to kind of give me an anchor to. The kids are now what my world revolves around, but it was cool. Helped me kind of transition off as I was neglecting the child, or neglecting thinking about a child. One thing, so back to the movie stuff. So one thing that I didn't bring up in the movie, and I thought about making like a 6th chapter, but it was long enough, was like now they have the Xbox One X and they have the PS4 Pro, and you even have phones where you have the super version of that phone. What was so cool about the Dreamcast is the Dreamcast was the super version of the PlayStation, the Saturn, and the Nintendo 64. Like, those ports are almost like the Xbox One X up-res. Like, the good ones were done with a stable frame rate. It came out at the tail end of the PlayStation cycle where developers wanted to do stuff that the system couldn't quite do. And honestly, the 64 and PlayStation, they could barely do 3D. Like, the masters, like Metal Gear Solid team or the Mario 64 team could get it done, and it still holds up today. But a lot of other people were like messing with stuff that just couldn't handle. You're putting a big swimming pool in a trailer park, you know? Like, you can see what they're trying to do, and you just can't, and they didn't figure it out, so the frame rate was just awful. Like, Perfect Dark is the perfect example of that. You had so many big ideas, but you just couldn't handle them. And then this thing comes out that could handle them, and then some. And they say Shenmue used up all the system's resources. I don't believe it. I think it could have gone further, and just because it was so easy to program for, they didn't have to come up with these tricks yet, and it was only alive for 2.5 years. So they didn't have to come up with the tricks that could have got another ounce of life on it. Like, especially as PlayStation 2 launched, like, Dreamcast games looked better. The video output was cleaner, the frame rate was better. Like, a lot of the PlayStation 2 stuff, especially launch, was muddy. And the Dreamcast was really clean and good because they knew what they were doing. And then PlayStation 2 and a little bit Xbox GameCube, like, that was a refinement, but they, especially at that PS2 launch, they were trying to do something else, and it just didn't maybe work out, like the bouncer, that type of thing. So it was really that super version of those consoles, and plus you had all these exclusive Sega games. Like, if the RAM pack for Nintendo 64 like had a substantial improvement on resolution and frame rate, which it really didn't, that would be the equivalent of it. Like, you see Ready to Rumble boxing. So it's like the first super version of a console or super version of a phone, and that was really cool. Because even at the time, I could feel the limits of that system. And you could make the same case that maybe Xbox 360 and to a greater or lesser extent PS3 weren't ready for HD, and now you have the Xbox One and the PS4 that can do HD. I mean, because developers didn't want to challenge themselves, so a lot of Xbox One games are at 720p, but like, that's your first, like, we know what we're doing with HD, the text is the right size. Like, Dreamcast was, we know what we're doing with 3D. And they were stretched really thin, so they couldn't have that ultimate Sonic experience. So that was just it was a refinement of everything that came before. I wish you could have put a Saturn game in it and just had the thing play better, kind of like what 360 games are in Xbox One. So that was kind of the thing. I didn't really know the narrative around it, and by that time I was trying to seal it up before the kids started to get more active and needy. So loved the system, had a great time making the video. I hope it has a second life on $99.99. And I'm still praying for a Dreamcast Mini, even though I have a modded Dreamcast with an SD card slot. Nothing huge I would change aside from having more people participate in the video. I reached out to like 10 of the medium-sized Sega people with a big Sega affiliation, and they just didn't get back to me. But 3 people stepped up, and I'm grateful for them playing a role in this. I should have reached out to someone who's a huge Sonic fan to talk about Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, because I dismissed those games because they're not for me, even though I used to be a Sonic fan. And someone else could have spoke to what those meant to them better. Yeah, and a lot of games I missed. Like Grandia 2 was a hot one. I talked about Marvel vs. Capcom a little bit, but mostly I talked about Power Stone. So I think I hit the bases, though. I don't know, maybe when my kids are playing video games, the Xbox 18 or whatever, they can come back and think of what their dad was playing 30 years ago. So thank you for watching that and this. And then I'm just going to put the raw interviews after this. And if that's something that's interesting to you, you can watch them. They're all good. And thank the people that were behind them. So this is Dreamcast Forever After. Forget about this. Watch the original one. That's all I got.
All right, check. My name is Chris Spencer, ChrisSpencer, and I'm recording a series of interview questions for the Dreamcast Forever project. First question is any personal stories around the launch of the Dreamcast or the announcement, and what got you excited about the system? So I was actually only 2 years old when the Dreamcast came out, so I wasn't really cognizant of what was going on when it was announced. But luckily my dad bought one around the time they came out. So some of my first memories of playing video games are with the Dreamcast, or Sonic Adventure. So even if I don't have the memories of the lead up to the console being available and the release and all the hype around it, I still have those early memories of the Dreamcast, both early from its lifetime and early in my lifetime. Next question is, did you take the Dreamcast online at all? So early on, yeah, we did use the Dreamcast online quite a bit. My dad and I and my brother would use the web browser 2.0 software to just look at the internet on a Dreamcast. We had the Dreamcast keyboard and I believe the mouse as well. And one of my most vivid memories of that was there's a button in a menu in Sonic Adventure that actually takes you to a website about Sonic Adventure. And there's information about Chow training and art, Sonic Adventure art, all kinds of stuff like that. And I really vividly remember that use of the Sega Dreamcast online capabilities. More recently, I've gotten into the homebrew connection for online games on the Dreamcast, like Phantasy Star Online, and some of the other games that had online multiplayer. There's still actually a thriving community of people who are using some wild devices and software to make their Dreamcast continue to connect to the internet. That's been a really interesting project and a lot of fun to tinker around with in 2019, 20 years after the Dreamcast came out in North America. Third question is about my favorite game experiences on the Sega Dreamcast. The Dreamcast kind of occupies a interesting spot in my mind. There's the nostalgia portion of my relationship with the Dreamcast, which involves as a kid playing games like Sonic Adventure and Capcom vs. SNK, and not really knowing what was going on, but those memories being fundamental to my understanding of what video games are and my further enjoyment of video games. But it also is one of those systems that still today has a lot of great games you can play on it. Specifically, games that really stick out in my mind are Crazy Taxi 2, Jet Grind Radio, Space Channel 5, Skies of Arcadia, so on and so forth. There's a lot of fascinating experiences that the Dreamcast has to offer that other consoles never ended up replicating. I guess specifically, some of my favorite gaming experiences are with Crazy Taxi 2. That game is so wild with the Offspring and Bad Religion soundtrack playing, and you're jumping over other cars and jumping onto bridges. You're driving underwater. It's totally ridiculous, but it feels so good, and the music is so exciting, and it's just one of those feel-good games that you really return to, or I really return to, pretty frequently. Some of the other experiences available on the console kind of get ragged on, but I find them kind of fascinating. Games like Seaman, where you have Leonard Nimoy voicing a fish with a human male face on the front, and you're talking to it through a microphone and having discussions with it. It's so weird. I mean, it's even weirder than Hey You Pikachu for the Nintendo 64, which was a similar concept. But Seaman was the distilled weirdness of the Dreamcast to me. The Dreamcast felt like this otherworldly thing that didn't have any total logic to it, and Seaman really exemplified that feeling, because you could throw anything you want at it and it would have some kind of response for it. And there's no actual artificial intelligence happening in the background there. It's just, I don't know, the writing in that game is so weird. And when I think about the Dreamcast, I usually think about games like Seaman or Space Channel 5, which was this rhythm game with a space news anchor who is on site at alien invasions, and she's dancing and making all of the Earthlings or humans dance with her to fight the aliens. And the music, again, the Dreamcast has such great music. The music is just so... creates the vibe. The vibe of the Dreamcast is often the vibe of the music of those games you're playing. And of course, games like Skies of Arcadia, which was one of my first JRPG experiences. Power Stone. Power Stone kind of came into my life at the height of my Smash Brothers fever, and I really was digging into these wacky 4-player party fighting game things. Capcom vs. SNK was one of my introductions into specifically the Japanese fighting game market, the 2D Japanese fighting game genre, and that kind of spawned a lifelong enjoyment of those games. Yeah, the Dreamcast in my mind is a twofold experience, in that so much of what I played early on in the Dreamcast lifetime and early on in my lifetime set my tastes for years to come. And then 15, 20 years later, when I really dug back into the Dreamcast, I started finding games I had never heard of that I also ended up really enjoying. So not only was it a tastemaker when I was a toddler, it's become a tastemaker now that I'm 22 years old. And it's really fascinating like that. A 20-year-old console continues to surprise me. And I think those are some of my favorite experiences, or when the Dreamcast throws another thing at me that I never would have imagined either existing or liking. So this question is, did I have the console when the discontinuation was announced, and how did that feel? So like I mentioned before, I was really young when the Dreamcast was alive and thriving. And so even though I did own the console, my family owned the console when it was announced that it was going to discontinue, I didn't really know what was going on. But kind of the fascinating thing that happened as a result of that was I started to see weird things happening. I had a Sonic game on my Dreamcast, and I had a Sonic game on my GameCube. But there were no Sonic games for the Nintendo 64 or the Super Nintendo or the NES. So I knew something had happened that was, okay, wait, Sonic was only on this Sega console, and now Sonic is on the GameCube, the PS2, and the Xbox. And as a, I guess, 5 years old at that point, that was kind of the way that I dug into Sega's history in the video game industry. Because we didn't have a Genesis, we didn't have a Master System, we didn't have a Saturn. All we had was a Dreamcast. But I could see that something had changed between the Dreamcast's release and the PS2's release. So I started to work backwards in learning about Sega's history, and Genesis does what Nintendo don't, and the failure of the Sega Saturn, as kind of cool as that system is too. I started to go back in time and realize, oh wow, there's a whole nother world of games I didn't even know existed. So from then on, as I got older, I started to play these Genesis games and these Master System games and really dig into this culture that I had never even known existed. So I really owe the Dreamcast for sparking my interest in learning more about video game history and how the market had changed in the time before I was alive, and then while I was alive. So yeah, even though I wasn't sure what was going on when the Dreamcast was discontinued, because the Dreamcast was discontinued, I just dove into learning about the history of all of that. And this last bit is just a little bit more personal information about me and the Dreamcast. So when I think about what video games mean to me and how I got started in this whole crazy world, and how video games then influenced me to go on to do what I'm doing in my life now, I really owe the Dreamcast a lot for that. Sort of the overall weirdness of the system was always so intriguing to me. And so while I was playing the games as a kid, like Sonic Adventure, and just enjoying them for games as they are, so much of what the Dreamcast did in terms of forward thinking and things of that nature really made me want to learn more about what games are as a medium. And nowadays, we're still talking about the Dreamcast. We're still feeling the tendrils of the Dreamcast in modern gaming. The Dreamcast was one of the first systems to really implement a DLC system. Like, yeah, there was the Sega Net and there was the Satellaview, but the first one that kind of made it a simple process was the Dreamcast. And now we have full downloadable games. More games are released digitally than are physically anymore. And the Dreamcast maybe didn't get the ball rolling for that, but was definitely one of the first platforms to pursue an avenue similar to that. So we talk a lot about game preservation and what it means to have this information stored and know what the Dreamcast was at its time of launch and through its life. And we really have to dig deep into what was that DLC? What were those web pages that you could access through these video games? What was the software you could use? And now, what new software alternatives do we have to come up with so we can access those old parts of the games? Like to connect online with the Dreamcast anymore, unless you have the broadband adapter, which is about $200 on eBay, you're connecting your Dreamcast to a Raspberry Pi, and your Raspberry Pi is acting like, is spoofing a modem, a phone line modem. And so much is happening with that to continue to create a thriving environment and community of people who feel like me and are just really invested in the Dreamcast life. So yeah, I owe a lot to the Dreamcast, and I'm excited to see where some more preservation happens and some more restoration and maybe some online functionality, because it's a gateway into a time that's past now, and I think there will always be an important place for that in the gaming community.
It's thinking. Hello, my name is Michael Torres. I'm from Fresno, California, and I would like to talk about the Dreamcast. And so, to start off with question number 1. Any stories, personal stories about the announcement and launch of the Dreamcast and what got me excited about the system? My original experience with the Dreamcast came back when I had been diagnosed with a blood disorder called ITP. I had learned about it from game magazines and spent a lot of time quarantined, basically, more or less, until my family brought it home for me one day. And it's held a special place in my heart ever since then. Okay. Question number 2. Did I take the Dreamcast online at all? Had I done any online gaming before that, and any experiences worth sharing? I never played the Dreamcast online. My family ran and operated a series of local game businesses, retail shops, and we'd stocked up once on Phantasy Star Online. I was super excited because this was the first JRPG, the science fiction that I was able to kind of see, and I remember just all the build-up and all the anticipation for it because Phantasy Star was such a popular series before that, and I didn't get to really play the Phantasy Star series. So I got it, I booted it up, and I remember needed a registration key, and after I registered and started playing it, I just remember this empty lobby and just like this ridiculous difficulty jump. And over there at the shop, we had a lot of returns during that time, and so. Okay, question number 3: favorite game experiences on the Dreamcast. So I have a ton of favorite game experiences because the software library for the Dreamcast is just absolutely incredible. There's so many classics that hold up to this day in terms of their gameplay, but the one that always stood out to me the most was Skies of Arcadia, 100%. To this day, there's never really been a game that's created that kind of atmosphere, that camaraderie, exploration, and just fun that Skies of Arcadia had. It's like if you got like One Piece, Final Fantasy, and just Sega all bundled up into one adventure. And it just happened to help me through one of the toughest periods of my life. So it's a special game. Now, did I have the system when it was announced to be discontinued? What was my response and how did it make me feel? I had the system when it was discontinued. Our shop and everything was just geared for when the PS2 had taken over the world. I had played on my Dreamcast up until I recovered, and I felt somber when it ended because the game stopped coming out for it. But after seeing the Jet Set Radio cameo in Travis Strikes Again for the Switch, the Space Channel 5 the revival in VR, and just the surviving community that continues to put out games for it, I can see that it meant as much to others as it meant to me. The Dreamcast is a special thing, and I hope Sega's legacy with the Dreamcast lives forever. Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Force Ogden, and I run the Dreamcast Today Facebook page as well as the website as well. And I've got a YouTube show which is called Retro Gamers Half Time, which primarily looks at Dreamcast games, sort of the newer releases for the machine, some of the more interesting bits and pieces that are happening post-death of the Dreamcast. But I think today we're here to really talk about experiences throughout the 20th anniversary of the Dreamcast, those 20 years, and where we've got to this point in time today. Now, personally for me, my experiences with the Dreamcast started in the earlier part of 2001, where I'd been round a neighbour's house and he had all the latest games consoles at this time, and he had a Dreamcast. And bearing in mind, before this point, I'd been used to playing the Sega Mega Drive, mostly 2D games, very simplistic affairs, and what he'd got here was, on this mythical white box, I remember, was Crazy Taxi. Now, being sort of a young, early teenager, playing Crazy Taxi absolutely blew my mind. The graphics were absolutely stunning. The gameplay was super fast. You had the blaring Offspring soundtrack going over the top of it. And the relative freedom that the game offered at this point, bearing in mind this is before Grand Theft Auto 3 came out on the PlayStation 2, the level of freedom was absolutely unheard of in games up to this point. Now, I did a little more research at the time, and I went into Toys R Us, a little go on their demo kiosk that they had there, which had Sonic Adventure running. And Sonic Adventure further cemented the fact that I just had to own this machine. It was absolutely beautiful. Just this scenery going on around you. I was so used to Sonic just running sort of from left to right of the screen, and Sonic Adventure came along, and you could go absolutely anywhere on it. It was absolutely fantastic. It was a revelation in my mind. Bearing in mind that the Saturn hadn't had a proper 3D Sonic game, so we'd skipped a generation. It almost seemed like a homecoming, seeing this thing run on Sega's own hardware. And even at that point, in early 2001, bearing in mind this was a couple of months before the announcement of discontinuation, I thought this machine is the absolute future. So it's a shame then that in March 2001, Sega decided to pull the plug on the Dreamcast hardware, which I remember to this day being on the internet, and it had come up on primitive version of IGN, I think it was, that Sega were no longer making hardware. They were going into just creating software on all the rival formats, starting with Game Boy Advance and going over to PS2, GameCube, and then the original Xbox. And yeah, it really upset me. I'd spent a good portion of time, a bunch of time in my school years, convincing my friends that Sega were the console manufacturer. They'd been on the market for so long. Their consoles were absolutely fantastic. I used to make these VHS tapes for a couple of non-believers in my friends group that hated Sega and a Dreamcast and thought the Dreamcast was absolutely rubbish when it came to graphics and gameplay. And I used to create these videos, and yeah, they did agree. They were like, yes, these games do look pretty darn good actually, and fun. And for that to then backfire and the announcement comes and all the games end up just getting spilled out onto the other machines was heartbreaking, really. But the experiences that I do carry with the Dreamcast, with its time on the market, it was the first slice of online gaming for many people. Now, I'm not talking about the fact that the Saturn and the Genesis or Mega Drive had their own online systems. They were very much like add-on systems, really, and in parts of the world you didn't even get them at all. The Dreamcast was the first real machine to come from the box with this capability of being able to go online, the little modem. And I played Planet Ring, was my sole gaming experience online. Even that, as a primitive, basic online like mini game collection, I thought it was really fantastic. I thought this was steps ahead in the future. Got your own little redemption code that you put in on Dream Arena, or Sega Net as it's called in North America, but yeah, it's Dream Arena over here. And it was absolutely fantastic. I really would have liked to have played more games online with the Dreamcast, but time is money. My mum and dad weren't willing to give up the phone line for too long. But aside from doing a bit of browsing online, which I did on the Dreamcast, I was very impressed by that, being able to send emails as well as browsing the web. was pretty cool for back then, and it will always stick in my head as a fond memory of the Dreamcast being well ahead of its time. When it comes to sort of the games on the Dreamcast, there are so many fantastic experiences on the machine for what is quite a small library in the West, keeping in mind that we probably only had like 230, 240 odd games over here versus, probably another 400 that came out in Japan exclusively. I think fond memories for me, of course, are Crazy Taxi and Sonic Adventure, as I've mentioned. But Shenmue, when I first went into my Game Station branch before actually working there, I asked about Shenmue, this game that came in a cardboard box. I asked the staff there, I said, "What's this game?" And they said, "It's so hard to describe what it is." They said, "It's less a game, more an experience, and you've got to give it a try." So based on that fact, I did. I bought it, I gave it a try, and I absolutely adored Shenmue 1 and absolutely adored Shenmue 2 as well. And they stick in my mind as definitive experiences on the Dreamcast hardware itself. I know that they've been ported over to the Xbox One and the PS4 newer machines, but to me they will always be quintessential Dreamcast experiences alongside Crazy Taxi and Sonic Adventure. Yes, ported over to different machines, but the definitive way in my mind to play these games will always be the Dreamcast. And I think that really sums everything up, that 20 years later you still are finding reasons to kick up your Dreamcast, stick in one of its many arcade experiences, its quickfire games, a game of Soul Calibur maybe, blasting away on Outrigger, playing against the bots on Unreal Tournament, maybe even playing the unreleased Half-Life if you feel the need to. Or maybe you're a gamer that is playing now the new games that are coming out, things published by Josh Prod, the NG dev team efforts, HuCast stuff, Sternwind. There are so many fantastic games that will cater for absolutely everybody on the Dreamcast, and I think that really is a powerful console, well above the means and the ingredients that were actually inside the machine when Sega made it off the shelf. So this is my 20th anniversary experiences of the Dreamcast, and I feel that it's a fantastic machine, and you guys obviously think so too because you're watching this now. So happy birthday Dreamcast for this year, and keep it real.